Ethan Brooks burst through the hospital doors, his daughter's unconscious body in his arms. "She won't wake up," he screamed at the nurses. But as doctors swarmed around 6-year-old Taylor, one voice cut through the chaos. Lena, the Caribbean nanny he'd fired just hours before, was singing in urgent patois. "Don't touch her," Ethan roared, but Taylor's eyes suddenly fluttered open. As if responding to some invisible thread connecting her to the Caribbean woman's voice, Taylor's eyelids began to flutter. The medical staff froze, watching in amazement as the child who hadn't responded to any of their interventions slowly opened her eyes. "Lena," Taylor whispered, her small hand reaching toward the sound of that familiar voice. Dr. Bennett, Taylor's child psychiatrist, appeared at Ethan's elbow, having rushed over from another wing of the hospital. She took in the scene with the sharp assessment of someone who'd spent 18 months trying to help this traumatized child. "This is the second time," she murmured to Ethan. "The pattern is undeniable." Before Ethan could respond, the emergency room doors burst open again, and Patricia Worthington stormed in like an avenging angel in Chanel. Rachel's mother had always carried herself with the imperious bearing of old New York money, but today her perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearl necklace seemed like armor against anything that threatened her version of propriety. "Get that woman away from my granddaughter," Patricia commanded, her icy gaze fixed on Lena. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned you about, Ethan." But Taylor's grip tightened on the bed rail as she turned toward Lena's voice. And for the first time in hours, color returned to her pale cheeks. The child who had been unconscious just moments before was now sitting up, reaching for the Caribbean woman who had somehow become her anchor in a world that kept taking away the people she loved. Ethan found himself at an impossible crossroads, his pride, his family's expectations, his carefully constructed world of social propriety. All of it warred against the undeniable evidence before his eyes. His daughter was alive and responsive because of a woman he'd dismissed as just the help, in a moment of cowardice. Through gritted teeth, swallowing every ounce of his considerable pride, he looked at Lena and spoke the words that would change everything. "Lena, please, help her." The power dynamic in that sterile hospital room shifted completely. The billionaire chief executive officer who commanded boardrooms and controlled vast business empires was begging his former employee, a woman he'd fired that very morning, to save his most precious treasure. But even as Taylor's crisis stabilized, even as the child clung to Lena's hand with desperate trust, the complications of their situation loomed like storm clouds. Patricia Worthington's lawyer was already on the phone, documenting this inappropriate dependency for the custody battle that would determine Taylor's future. Dr. Bennett was taking notes that could either validate or damn Lena's unconventional methods. And somewhere beneath the professional necessity and family drama, Ethan Brooks was beginning to realize that his feelings for this remarkable Caribbean woman went far deeper than he'd ever allowed himself to admit. As Taylor fell into peaceful sleep, still holding Lena's hand, Ethan stared at the woman who had just saved his daughter for the second time. Lena Davis, with her warm brown skin glowing under the harsh hospital lights, her natural curls escaping from their protective style, her expressive dark eyes reflecting both compassion and quiet strength. She was everything his world had taught him to overlook, and everything his heart was learning to treasure. The battle for Taylor's future was just beginning. But in that moment, watching his daughter breathe peacefully for the first time in hours, Ethan Brooks began to understand that some things were worth fighting the entire world to protect. Have you ever watched someone you care about make a decision that breaks your heart because they're too afraid to fight for what's right? Tell me your story in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already feeling the pull of this impossible situation. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in the Brooks mansion, with Lena Davis humming Caribbean melodies while she prepared Taylor's breakfast. The guest cottage where she lived sat behind the main house like a cheerful afterthought, painted in the warm yellows and blues that reminded her of home in Barbados. Inside, children's books in both English and Bajan patois lined the shelves, alongside small bottles of traditional herbs and a tiny altar with photos of her grandmother Nina and the community that had raised her. Lena had been awake since 5:30 in the morning. As was her custom, preparing breadfruit and saltfish, Taylor's favorite breakfast, and selecting the perfect story for their morning session. Today she'd chosen a tale about Anansi the spider, the trickster hero of Caribbean folklore, who taught children that even the smallest creature could overcome the greatest challenges through wisdom and courage. At 29, Lena carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth, even when others failed to see it. Her master's degree in child psychology from Columbia University hung framed on her cottage wall, but it was her grandmother's teachings about traditional healing that truly guided her work with traumatized children. She understood trauma in ways that textbooks couldn't teach, how it lived in the body, how it spoke through silence, how it could be coaxed out through songs and stories that touched the soul rather than just the mind. As she arranged colorful scarves for sensory play and tuned her small guitar for music therapy, Lena had no idea that 8 floors above her in the main mansion, Ethan Brooks was on a conference call that would determine her fate. In his mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by expensive art and photos of his late wife Rachel and daughter Taylor, Ethan sat rigid in his leather chair as Patricia Worthington's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Either that Caribbean woman goes, or we file for emergency custody today." Patricia's voice carried the steely determination of someone accustomed to getting her way. "I've spoken with our lawyers, Ethan. We have grounds." The family lawyer's voice joined the conversation, professional and cold. "The court will question your judgment in allowing unqualified help to treat a traumatized child. Miss Davis's methods are unconventional at best." Ethan's steel-blue eyes fixed on his laptop screen, where security footage showed Taylor's only genuine smiles over the past 3 weeks. Every single one occurring during her time with Lena. The child who had been silent and withdrawn since her mother's death 18 months ago had begun humming Caribbean songs, engaging with books, even speaking in whispered Bajan patois that Lena had taught her. "She's not unqualified," Ethan said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction. "She has a master's degree from Columbia." Patricia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "In what? Folklore? Ethan, that child needs proper therapy, not primitive island superstitions. Taylor is a Worthington heir. She needs to be raised with appropriate cultural influences." The racist undertones in his mother-in-law's words made Ethan's jaw clench, but the custody threat was real. The Worthington family had old New York money, social connections, and enough influence to make good on their promises. They'd already questioned his fitness as a parent, blamed him for Rachel's death. And now they were using Taylor as a weapon to maintain their vision of propriety. "I've arranged for Dr. Harrison from Presbyterian to take over Taylor's care," Patricia continued. "He's worked with the best of families. He understands the importance of maintaining proper standards." Ethan stared at the security footage of his daughter laughing as Lena helped her plant herbs in the garden, using traditional Barbadian methods to teach the child that growth was possible after destruction. In just 3 weeks, Lena had accomplished what 18 months of expensive therapy had failed to achieve. But Patricia's voice cut through his doubts like a blade. "Choose, Ethan. Your daughter's proper upbringing, or your temporary infatuation with the help." The words hit their mark. Temporary infatuation. Was that what this was? The way his pulse quickened when Lena entered a room. The way he found excuses to observe her therapy sessions. The way her laughter seemed to breathe life back into a house that had felt like a mausoleum since Rachel's death. "I'll handle it," he heard himself saying, heeding the weakness in his own voice. "Today, Ethan. She's gone by noon, or the custody papers are filed by 2 o'clock. The line went dead, leaving Ethan alone with his cowardice and the security footage of his daughter's joy. Joy that he was about to destroy with his own hands. Meanwhile, in the mansion's gleaming kitchen, Lena was arranging Taylor's breakfast on cheerful, Caribbean-colored plates. Completely unaware that her world was about to collapse, she'd been humming a traditional Bajan lullaby, the same one her grandmother Nina had sung to her after her father abandoned the family when Lena was 8 years old. The kitchen was a study in modern luxury, marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and enough space to feed a small army. Lena had managed to make it feel warm with small touches. A vase of tropical flowers. the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg, and always, always music playing softly in the background. Karen Mills, the head housekeeper, who'd worked for the Brooks family for 8 years, watched Lena's preparations with barely concealed disapproval. Karen was a woman of proper British heritage, who believed in maintaining strict boundaries between family and staff, and she'd never understood Mr. Brooks's decision to hire this unconventional woman for such an important role. Taylor should be eating proper English breakfast, Karen muttered, eyeing the breadfruit with suspicion. None of this foreign food nonsense. Lena's smile remained patient and warm. She loves it, Miss Karen. It reminds her that there are beautiful things in the world beyond her sadness. That's what proper therapy is for, Karen replied stiffly. Not fairy tales and folk songs. Before Lena could respond, Ethan Brooks entered the kitchen, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His usual commanding presence felt different this morning. Cold, distant, dangerous. He was dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, every dark hair in place. But his steel blue eyes held something that made Lena's stomach clench with foreboding. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Karen, please get Taylor ready for school. Lena's hands stilled on the breakfast plates. In 3 weeks of working for this family, she'd learned to read Ethan Brooks like a weather system. His controlled exterior masked depths of grief and guilt that he rarely let anyone see. But this morning felt different. This morning felt like a goodbye. Mr. Brooks, is everything all right? He didn't meet her eyes. Your services are no longer required. I need you gone by noon. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She gripped the marble counter to steady herself, her mind racing through the past few weeks, searching for what she might have done wrong. Had she overstepped boundaries, been too familiar with Taylor, challenged his authority in some way? But Taylor's making such progress, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Yesterday she spoke 3 full sentences during our storytelling session. She's learning to process the trauma through the Anansi stories, and the music therapy is helping with her anxiety attacks. Enough. Ethan's voice cut through her explanations like a whip. I won't have my daughter's head filled with primitive nonsense. The word primitive landed like a slap. Lena had heard it before, from other wealthy families who'd dismissed her methods without understanding them, from professors who'd questioned her research, from a world that saw her education and expertise as less valuable because they were rooted in Caribbean traditions. But hearing it from Ethan Brooks, a man she'd begun to respect, a man whose daughter she'd grown to love like her own, a man whose grief she'd recognized because it mirrored her own childhood pain, hearing it from him felt like betrayal. Those primitive methods are helping her process trauma that 18 months of traditional therapy couldn't touch. Lena said, her voice rising with passionate conviction as she stood to defend her life's work. Ethan moved closer, his own anger matching hers. She needs real therapy, not fairy tales and folk songs. They ended up standing chest to chest in the gleaming kitchen, both breathing hard from the intensity of their conflict. The breakfast plate sat forgotten between them as months of carefully maintained professional boundaries crumbled under the weight of their emotions. For a moment that stretched like eternity, their eyes locked. Lena could see the pain beneath his anger, the fear driving his cruelty, and in that charged space between them, she could feel the attraction that had been building like an electrical storm, dangerous, undeniable, and completely inappropriate. Ethan's breath caught as he stared down at this remarkable woman who'd brought his daughter back to life, who challenged him with her fierce intelligence and gentle strength, who made him feel things he'd thought died with Rachel. The scent of her skin, coconut oil and warm spices, filled his senses, and for one insane moment he wanted to forget everything except the way her dark eyes flashed with righteous fire. Then reality crashed back, and he stepped away abruptly, professional distance reasserting itself like a cold wall between them. Just pack your things, he said, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. Lena watched him walk away, her heart breaking not just for herself, but for the little girl upstairs who was about to lose another mother figure, and for the man who was too afraid of his family's judgment to fight for what was right. In her cottage an hour later, Lena sat on her bed, surrounded by suitcases, tears streaming down her cheeks as she folded the colorful clothes and books that had made this place feel like home. Each item told a story. A traditional Bajan dress her grandmother had sent for special occasions, the children's books, written in patois, that Taylor had begun to read, the small bottles of lavender oil and chamomile that had helped the child sleep through her nightmares. Her phone rang, and Nina Davis's warm voice filled the tiny room like a blessing. "What's wrong, baby girl?" her grandmother asked from 3,000 miles away in Barbados. Nina had raised Lena after her father's abandonment, teaching her that traditional healing wasn't primitive. It was ancient wisdom that connected them to generations of strong women who'd survived and thrived despite the world's attempts to diminish them. "They don't understand our ways, Grandmama," Lena sobbed. "They think what we do is just superstition. Some people fear what they can't control, baby girl, but that little one needs you. I can feel it in my spirit." "How do I explain to a 6-year-old that love isn't enough?" Lena whispered, holding a drawing Taylor had made yesterday. A family picture that included Lena alongside Ethan and Taylor, all three of them holding hands under a rainbow. "Love is always enough," Nina said firmly. "It just sometimes takes courage to claim it." As Lena finished packing, she could hear Taylor's voice in the main house, getting ready for school, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter again. The child had already lost her mother to a car accident. Now, she was about to lose the woman who'd become her emotional lifeline. And she would never understand why. At 11:45, Lena carried her final suitcase to her Honda Civic, her heart breaking with every step. The main house loomed above her like an elegant fortress, and somewhere inside, Ethan Brooks was making business calls, probably trying to forget that he'd just destroyed his daughter's chance at healing to appease his dead wife's prejudiced family. But as she loaded her car, Taylor's voice drifted down from an upstairs window, and Lena's blood ran cold. The child was on the phone with Patricia Worthington, and even from the driveway, Lena could hear the devastating words that would trigger the crisis yet to come. "Yes, grandmother, she's just the help. Taylor will get over it." Lena looked up to see Taylor's face appear at her bedroom window, the child's steel blue eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The little girl had heard her father dismiss their bond as meaningless, reduce Lena to nothing more than hired help who could be discarded without consequence. "Lena, don't go." Taylor's scream pierced the afternoon air as she realized what was happening. "Please don't leave me like Mommy did." The raw pain in that child's voice nearly brought Lena to her knees, but she forced herself to smile and wave, calling up with false cheerfulness, "I'll always love you, little star. Remember that?" Then she got in her car and drove away, watching in her rearview mirror as Taylor pressed her face against the window, her mouth open in a silent scream that would soon become all too real. At 12:15, Karen Mills found Taylor collapsed in the mansion's marble foyer, hyperventilating and unconscious. The child who had finally begun to trust again had watched another mother figure disappear from her life, and her 6-year-old mind couldn't process the abandonment. The panic attack that followed was severe enough to trigger flashbacks to her mother's car accident, and by the time Ethan came running, his daughter's small body was limp and unresponsive. For the second time in 18 months, Ethan Brooks found himself racing to the hospital with his unconscious daughter in his arms, knowing that his own choices had put her there. But this time, salvation would come from an unexpected source, the remarkable Caribbean woman he'd been too proud and too afraid to fight for. The ride back to the Brooks mansion felt like a funeral procession. Taylor sat between Ethan and Lena in the back of the limousine, her small hand clutching Lena's fingers with desperate strength, while her other arm remained wrapped around her father's waist. The child hadn't spoken since whispering Lena's name in the hospital, but her steel blue eyes moved constantly between the two adults, as if afraid one of them might disappear if she looked away. Ethan stared out the window at the familiar streets of Manhattan, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Dr. Bennett's words echoed in his mind. This pattern of medical crisis when separated from Miss Davis is undeniable. For Taylor's immediate well-being, I'm recommending she remain in the household until we can develop a more gradual transition plan. Professional recommendation, legal protection, medical necessity, all the clinical terms that allowed him to bring Lena back without admitting the truth. That watching his daughter collapse had shattered something inside him that had nothing to do with parental duty and everything to do with the way his heart stopped when he thought he might lose them both. "The cottage is still available," he said stiffly, not looking at Lena. Same arrangement as before. Professional boundaries maintained. Lena's warm brown eyes studied his profile, seeing through his careful composure to the fear beneath. "What about your family's concerns? Let me worry about my family." But even as he said it, Ethan knew Patricia Worthington would be apoplectic when she discovered Lena's return. The custody threat hadn't disappeared. It had only been temporarily delayed by medical necessity. And now, with Dr. Bennett's official recommendation on record, the Worthington lawyers would have to find new ammunition for their war. As the limousine pulled through the mansion's gates, Karen Mills appeared on the front steps, her expression carefully neutral as she watched the returning prodigal. Behind her, the 16-room mansion rose like a monument to old money and older prejudices, its limestone facade and manicured gardens speaking of a world where people like Lena Davis were expected to know their place. "Welcome back, Miss Davis," Karen said with professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide her confusion. In 8 years of working for wealthy families, she'd never seen an employee fired and rehired in the same day, especially not one who'd arrived in the master's limousine holding his daughter's hand. "Thank you, Miss Karen," Lena replied with quiet dignity. "I know the situation is unusual." Unusual was an understatement. As they entered the mansion's grand foyer, with its crystal chandelier and marble staircase, the awkwardness was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan moved with the controlled precision of a man walking through a minefield, hyper-aware of every glance, every accidental touch, every breath shared in the confined space. "Taylor needs rest," he announced to no one in particular. "I'll be in my study if you need anything." But Taylor's grip on Lena's hand tightened, and she looked up at her father with eyes too old for her 6 years. "Don't go away again, Daddy. Promise." The simple words hit Ethan like a physical blow. In his daughter's mind, he was the one who had left, who had chosen business calls over bedtime stories, board meetings over tea parties, his family's approval over her healing. Rachel used to accuse him of the same thing, and look how that had ended. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart," he said, kneeling to meet Taylor's eyes. "Lena's going to help you get settled in your room, and then maybe we could all have dinner together tonight." The suggestion surprised everyone, including himself. Family dinners had been abandoned after Rachel's death, replaced by solitary meals in his study, while Taylor ate with whatever nanny or therapist was currently attempting to reach her. But something about today's crisis had shifted the foundation of their careful routines. Lena's face lit up with cautious hope. "I could make Taylor's favorite breadfruit and saltfish." "With the mango chutney?" Taylor asked, speaking for the first time since the hospital, her voice small but clear. "With extra mango chutney," Lena promised, and was rewarded with the first genuine smile Taylor had managed all day. As they climbed the grand staircase toward Taylor's room, Ethan found himself following, drawn by the sound of his daughter's tentative questions about Lena's day, her shy requests for specific bedtime stories, her gradual return to the child she'd been becoming before this morning's devastation. Taylor's bedroom was a princess fantasy brought to life. Pink walls, a canopy bed with sheer curtains, and enough dolls and stuffed animals to stock a toy store. But scattered among the traditional American toys were the colorful additions Lena had introduced over the past 3 weeks. Caribbean picture books, small drums for music therapy, and a collection of natural stones and shells that Taylor used for sensory grounding during anxiety attacks. "Can we do the spider story tonight?" Taylor asked, as Lena helped her change into comfortable clothes. "The one where Anansi teaches the other animals about courage?" "Of course, little star. But first, you need to rest. Today was very scary for everyone." Ethan watched from the doorway as Lena settled Taylor into bed with the easy competence of someone who understood traumatized children. No clinical detachment, no textbook responses, just genuine warmth and intuitive care that seemed to flow from some deep well of empathy. "Lena," Taylor said as her eyelids began to droop, "are you going to stay forever this time?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Lena's eyes found Ethan's across the room. In that charged moment, he saw all her own fears reflected back at him. The terror of loving a child she might lose, the The professional vulnerability of working for a man who could destroy her career with a word. The cultural isolation of being the only person of color in a household that barely tolerated her presence. "I'm going to stay as long as your daddy needs me to help you feel better," she said carefully. "But what if he gets scared again?" The innocent words landed like an accusation, and Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. His 6-year-old daughter had seen through his professional excuses to the cowardice beneath. He'd been scared of Patricia Worthington's threats, of society's judgment, of his own growing feelings for a woman who represented everything his world had taught him to avoid. "Then we'll remind him that families stick together," Lena said gently, "even when the world gets confusing." After Taylor drifted off to sleep, Ethan and Lena found themselves alone in the hallway, the silence stretching between them, like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. The afternoon light filtering through the mansion's tall windows cast golden highlights across Lena's dark skin, and Ethan found himself remembering the way she'd felt in his arms when he'd carried her luggage that first day, the warmth of her hand when she'd comforted him during Taylor's nightmares, the electric shock of awareness when their eyes met across his daughter's hospital bed. "We need to talk," he said finally. Lena nodded, following him down the hallway toward his study. The room was Ethan's sanctuary, mahogany walls lined with leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and a massive desk that served as command center for his billion-dollar empire. But as Lena entered, her presence seemed to transform the masculine space, bringing warmth and life to corners that had felt cold and empty since Rachel's death. "I owe you an apology," Ethan began, then stopped, running his hands through his dark hair. "Hell, I owe you more than that. I owe you an explanation." Lena settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her natural grace making the formal furniture seem less intimidating. "I understand you were under pressure from your family. That's not an excuse for what I said. Calling your methods primitive, treating you like you were disposable." He turned to face the window, unable to meet her eyes. "I was a coward, and my daughter paid the price." "Why?" The simple question carried more weight than a full interrogation. "Why were you willing to sacrifice her healing for their approval?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Lena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, with barely controlled emotion. "Because they blame me for Rachel's death. Because they've made it clear that one wrong move, one questionable decision, and they'll take Taylor away from me. Because I've already failed one family, and I can't survive failing another." The confession hung between them like a raw wound, and Lena felt her heart break a little for this powerful man who carried such devastating guilt. She'd seen the pattern before in her work with traumatized families, grief that turned inward, becoming self-punishment and fear-based decisions that hurt the very people they were meant to protect. "Tell me about Rachel," she said softly. Ethan's shoulders tensed. He rarely spoke about his wife to anyone, especially not to employees. But something about Lena's gentle voice, her genuine concern, made the words come easier than they should have. She was perfect, on paper. Everything the Worthington family wanted for their daughter. But she was lonely, I think. I was always working, always building the business, always convinced that success would somehow make me worthy of their acceptance." He laughed bitterly. "The night she died, she was driving to meet our marriage counselor. I was supposed to go with her, but I had an emergency conference call. Always an emergency that was more important than my family." "That doesn't make you responsible for the accident, doesn't it?" Ethan turned to face her, and Lena saw the depth of his self-recrimination. "If I'd been in that car, if I'd prioritized my marriage over a business deal, if I'd been the husband she deserved, instead of a stranger who shared her bed, you'd both be dead, and Taylor would be an orphan." The stark truth of Lena's words stopped Ethan cold. He'd never considered that possibility, that his survival might have been necessary, that his guilt might be misplaced, that the universe might have spared him for a reason. "Taylor needs you," Lena continued, rising from her chair to move closer to him. "Not the perfect father you think you should be, but the real man who loves her enough to swallow his pride and ask for help. The man who carried her to the hospital twice because he couldn't bear to lose her." They were standing close now, close enough that Ethan could see the flecks of gold in Lena's dark eyes, close enough to catch the scent of coconut oil and tropical flowers that seemed to follow her everywhere. Close enough to remember that beneath all the professional complications and family drama, he was a man who hadn't felt truly alive since the moment this remarkable woman walked into his house. "Lena," he said, her name coming out rougher than he intended. Before he could finish the thought, Taylor's scream shattered the afternoon quiet. Both adults rushed toward the sound, finding the child sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face as she pointed toward the window, where storm clouds were gathering. "The dark clouds," Taylor sobbed. "Like the day Mommy went to heaven." Ethan reached her first, gathering his daughter into his arms as thunder rumbled in the distance. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just rain. You're safe." But Taylor's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow, the beginning signs of another panic attack. Lena moved to the other side of the bed, her voice immediately shifting into the calming tones she used for therapy. "Taylor, little star, listen to my voice," she said, beginning to hum a familiar Caribbean lullaby. "Remember what we practiced? We're going to breathe like the ocean waves. In and out, in and out." Gradually, Taylor's breathing slowed to match Lena's rhythm, but she wouldn't let go of either adult, keeping one arm around her father's neck and the other reaching for Lena's hand. "Both of you stay," she whispered. "Please, both of you." As thunder rolled overhead and rain began pattering against the windows, the three of them settled onto Taylor's bed. Ethan found himself on one side of his daughter, while Lena sat on the other, and for the first time since Rachel's death, Taylor fell asleep peacefully during the storm. But as the hours passed and afternoon turned to evening, Ethan became hyper-aware of Lena's presence beside him. The way she unconsciously swayed to some internal rhythm while humming to Taylor, the gentle competence of her hands as she adjusted the child's blankets, the soft sound of her breathing in the quiet room. At some point, exhaustion overtook them all, and Ethan woke to find himself lying beside his daughter, with Lena on the other side, all three of them having fallen asleep together. In the soft light of Taylor's nightlight, Lena looked younger, more vulnerable, her face relaxed in sleep, and her hands still protectively covering Taylor's. This was dangerous territory, this sense of family, this feeling of completeness that he thought died with Rachel. But as he watched his daughter sleep peacefully between them, Ethan couldn't bring himself to regret the moment. That's when he noticed that Lena's eyes were open, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's been sleeping through storms since she started staying with you," he whispered. "Music calms the nervous system," Lena replied softly. "Traditional lullabies carry generational healing. My grandmother used to say that when we sing the old songs, we call on the strength of all the women who came before us." "Is that what you're doing? Calling on ancestral strength?" Lena's smile was gentle and mysterious. Sometimes the strongest magic is just love dressed up in ancient wisdom. The word magic should have set off his skeptical businessman's alarms, but lying there in the soft glow of his daughter's room, watching this remarkable woman who'd brought his child back to life, Ethan found himself believing in possibilities he'd never considered before. "Lena," he said quietly, "what happened today? The firing, the hospital, bringing you back. I need you to know it wasn't just about Taylor's medical needs." She waited, her dark eyes patient and understanding. "I need you to know that what I feel for you, it's not appropriate, and it's not professional, and it's going to complicate everything." He paused, gathering courage. "But it's real." The confession hung between them like a bridge, and for a moment, Lena's resolve wavered. She'd felt it too, the attraction that sparked every time they were in the same room, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled, the dangerous warmth that spread through her chest when he looked at her like she was precious, rather than hired help. But she also knew the realities of their situation. She was an employee in his house, a Caribbean woman in a world of old New York money, a trauma therapist falling for the father of her patient. Every professional boundary and social convention screamed that this was impossible. "Mr. Brooks," she began, but he cut her off gently. "Ethan, my name is Ethan." The intimacy of first names felt like crossing a line, but Lena found herself unable to retreat. "Ethan, we can't. Your family's threats, my professional ethics, Taylor's needs. I know, he said, I know all the reasons why this is impossible. But I also know that I've never felt more alive than I have these past 3 weeks, watching you heal my daughter, and somehow heal me in the process. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Taylor stirred between them, unconsciously reaching for both adults in her sleep. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. This child who'd already lost so much, depending on 2 people who were struggling not to fall in love with each other. What are we going to do? Lena whispered. I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I know I can't lose you again. Either of you. As if sensing the emotional weight of the moment, Taylor's eyes fluttered open, and she looked between the 2 adults with the solemn wisdom of a child who'd learned too early that love was fragile. Are you going to be my family now? She asked sleepily. All of us together? The innocent question carried more power than any legal document or business contract. In that moment, lying together in the soft glow of a child's bedroom, while storm clouds gathered outside, Ethan Brooks and Lena Davis realized they'd already become something more dangerous than employer and employee. They'd become a family. And families, as Taylor was about to teach them, were worth fighting for. The next few days passed in a delicate dance of professional boundaries and growing attraction. Ethan found himself inventing reasons to be present during Taylor's therapy sessions, watching with fascination as Lena transformed his study into a Caribbean healing space with colorful scarves, small drums, and the gentle sound of traditional music playing softly in the background. Today we're going to talk to Anansi about brave choices, Lena explained to Taylor, settling cross-legged on the Persian rug with a collection of picture books spread between them. Sometimes the spider has to choose between staying safe in his web or venturing out to help others. Taylor nodded solemnly, her blue eyes bright with engagement. Like when Daddy had to choose between being scared and bringing you back home? From his position by the window, Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. His 6-year-old daughter had reduced his complex emotional crisis to its essential truth. He'd been afraid, and courage had meant choosing love over fear. Exactly like that, little star, Lena said, shooting Ethan a meaningful glance. Sometimes being brave means admitting when we've made mistakes and working to fix them. As the week progressed, the household began to settle into new rhythms. Breakfast became a family affair, with Taylor chattering about her dreams while Lena served traditional Caribbean dishes that the child devoured with enthusiasm. Ethan found himself lingering over coffee, reluctant to leave for the office when his home had suddenly become the most interesting place in his world. Karen Mills watched these developments with growing concern, her British sensibilities offended by the blurring of class lines. During her weekly call to Patricia Worthington, she didn't hesitate to report on the inappropriate familiarity developing under the Brooks roof. He's eating breakfast with them, Karen whispered into her phone from the pantry. Like they're equals. And the way he looks at her, it's not proper, Mrs. Worthington, not proper at all. Patricia's response was swift and merciless. By Friday afternoon, a black sedan was pulling up to the mansion's front entrance, and Patricia Worthington emerged like an avenging angel in Armani, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her blue eyes blazing with determination. Ethan was in a video conference with Tokyo when Karen knocked on his study door. Mrs. Worthington is here, sir. She's asking to see you immediately. Through the study's French doors, Ethan could see Lena and Taylor in the garden, the child helping to plant herbs while Lena explained the traditional uses for each one. They were both laughing at something, Taylor's face glowing with the kind of joy he'd thought was lost forever. The sight filled him with a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. Tell her I'll be with her in a moment, he said, ending his conference call and steeling himself for battle. Patricia Worthington had made herself comfortable in the mansion's formal living room, a space that hadn't been used since Rachel's funeral. She sat ramrod straight on the antique sofa, her posture radiating disapproval as she surveyed the room for evidence of Lena's influence. Patricia, Ethan said coolly as he entered, this is unexpected. Is it? Her voice could have frozen champagne. I hear the Caribbean woman is back in residence, after our very clear conversation earlier this week. Dr. Bennett recommended. I don't care what some liberal psychiatrist recommended, Patricia cut him off. I care about my granddaughter being raised with proper values by appropriate influences, and that woman is neither proper nor appropriate. The racist undertones in her words made Ethan's jaw clench, but before he could respond, Taylor's laughter drifted in from the garden. Patricia's head snapped toward the sound, her expression growing even more severe. She's outside with that woman right now, isn't she? Learning God knows what kind of primitive practices. She's learning to garden, Ethan said flatly, and she's speaking in full sentences for the first time since her mother died. If you have a problem with that progress, I suggest you examine your priorities. Patricia rose from the sofa like a queen addressing a rebellious subject. My priority is ensuring that Rachel's daughter grows up to be a proper young lady, not some exotic experiment in cultural mixing. The family lawyers have been very clear about our options, Ethan. End this inappropriate situation, or we will. And what exactly do you consider inappropriate? A qualified child psychologist helping my daughter heal from trauma? Don't play naive with me. Karen has reported on the familiarity between you and this employee. Shared meals, intimate conversations, the three of you sleeping in the same bed. She had a panic attack during a thunderstorm. Ethan's voice rose despite his attempts to maintain control. Both Lena and I stayed with her until she felt safe. If you consider parental comfort inappropriate, I consider her widowed father developing romantic feelings for the domestic help to be a crisis of judgment that threatens my granddaughter's well-being. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Ethan realized that his feelings for Lena were more transparent than he'd thought. Patricia's lawyer-trained mind had identified the real threat to her control, not just Lena's methods, but the possibility that Ethan might choose love over family approval. My personal feelings are not your concern, he said carefully. They become my concern when they affect Taylor's upbringing, when they influence your decision-making in ways that prioritize your desires over her needs. Before Ethan could respond, the French doors opened and Taylor burst into the room, dirt-stained and glowing with excitement. Lena following close behind with a gentle smile. Daddy, look what we planted. Taylor held up her small hands, proudly displaying the rich earth under her fingernails. Lena says the lavender will help me sleep better, and the mint will make tea that tastes like sunshine. Patricia's face went rigid with horror. Taylor, darling, you're absolutely filthy. What would your mother say about such behavior? The child's face fell, and she looked down at her hands with sudden shame. But we were making a healing garden. Healing garden? Patricia's voice dripped with disdain. Nonsense. You need to go upstairs immediately and have that woman, she gestured toward Lena without looking at her, clean you up properly. A Worthington lady does not play in the dirt like a common. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Lena's expression remained carefully neutral, but Ethan saw the flash of pain in her dark eyes, the slight straightening of her shoulders, as she prepared to defend herself and her methods. That's when something inside Ethan Brooks finally snapped. That's enough, he said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. You will not speak about gardening as if it's beneath my daughter's dignity. You will not dismiss Lena's professional expertise as nonsense. And you will not bring your prejudices into my home and use them to shame a 6-year-old child for finding joy. Patricia's mouth opened in shock. In all the years since Rachel's death, Ethan had deferred to her judgment, accepted her criticisms, allowed her to dictate terms for Taylor's upbringing. This was the first time he'd stood up to her directly, and the power dynamic in the room shifted palpably. How dare you? No, Ethan continued, moving to stand beside Lena and Taylor in a clear statement of solidarity. How dare you come into my home and try to make my daughter ashamed of healing? How dare you dismiss the woman who's given Taylor more progress in 3 weeks than we've seen in 18 months? And how dare you pretend your objections are about my daughter's well-being when they're really about your inability to accept that love comes in forms you didn't expect? The last words surprised even him, but as he spoke them, Ethan realized they were completely true. This wasn't about appropriate cultural influences or professional boundaries. This was about a woman whose heart had been closed by grief, learning to love again, and a family structure that couldn't be contained by Patricia Worthington's narrow definitions. Taylor, sensing the tension between the adults, instinctively moved closer to Lena, who placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder. The simple gesture, protective, maternal, natural, seemed to inflame Patricia's anger even further. "If you continue down this path," Patricia said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury, "if you choose this woman over your daughter's proper upbringing, I will file for emergency custody on Monday morning. The courts will hear about shared bedrooms, inappropriate relationships, and a child being raised by someone whose methods border on negligence." "Those methods are healing her," Ethan said firmly. "Are they? Or are you so infatuated with your exotic employee that you can't see the damage being done?" The word exotic landed like a slap, and Lena's careful composure finally cracked. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "perhaps I should take Taylor upstairs while you and your mother-in-law discuss this privately." "No," Ethan said, surprising everyone, including himself. "You're part of this family now. You stay." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at Patricia's feet. Ethan had just publicly acknowledged Lena as family, crossing every social and professional boundary that had kept their relationship in the realm of the acceptable. Patricia's face went white with rage. "Family? Ethan, she's an employee. She's hired help. You cannot possibly be so deluded as to think." "I think," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to say, "that love doesn't care about social conventions. I think that the woman who's brought my daughter back to life, who's taught her to trust again, who's made our house feel like a home for the first time since Rachel died, I think that woman deserves more respect than you're willing to give." Taylor looked up at him with shining eyes. "Does that mean Lena gets to stay forever?" The innocent question forced Ethan to confront the implications of his own words. Was he ready to fight his deceased wife's family for the right to love again? Was he prepared to risk everything, his social standing, his business connections, possibly even his daughter, for a woman he'd known for 3 weeks? Looking down at Taylor's hopeful face, then at Lena's carefully controlled expression that couldn't quite hide her own hope, Ethan Brooks realized he was already past the point of no return. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, reaching out to take Lena's hand in full view of Patricia Worthington and her prejudices. "That's exactly what it means." The moment their fingers intertwined, electricity shot through both of them. 3 weeks of careful boundaries, professional distance, and suppressed attraction culminated in that single point of contact. Lena's hand was warm and soft in his, and when she looked up at him with wonder and gratitude and something deeper that he didn't dare name, Ethan felt his heart open completely for the first time since Rachel's death. Patricia Worthington witnessed the entire exchange with the expression of someone watching a natural disaster unfold. "This is a mistake that will destroy everything," she said coldly, gathering her purse and heading toward the door. "When the custody papers are filed on Monday, remember that you chose this path." After she left, the mansion felt lighter, as if an oppressive storm front had finally passed. Taylor bounced on her toes with excitement, clearly thrilled by her father's declaration, but Lena looked troubled. "Ethan," she said quietly, still holding his hand. "What you just did, the consequences." "I know," he said. "Believe me, I know exactly what I just risked, but I also know that I can't live in fear anymore. We'll fight the custody battle, we'll face whatever comes, but I won't pretend that what's happening between us isn't real." That evening, after Taylor had been bathed and fed and tucked him to bed with extra stories to counteract the day's drama, Ethan found Lena in the garden, where she'd been sitting quietly among the herbs they'd planted that afternoon. The night air was warm and fragrant, with lavender and mint, and the Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance like fallen stars. Lena sat on a small stone bench, her natural curls loose around her shoulders, and her face tilted toward the moon. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said, settling beside her on the bench. "Just thinking about what comes next." She replied, "Your mother-in-law is serious about those custody threats. Let her try. Taylor will speak for herself about what makes her happy, and any judge will see the progress she's made with you." Lena turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the garden lights. And what about us? What we're starting to feel for each other? The question hung between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. All day, since he'd taken her hand in front of Patricia, since he'd declared her part of their family, the tension between them had been building to this moment. What I feel for you, Ethan said carefully, goes beyond professional appreciation, beyond gratitude for what you've done for Taylor. What I feel for you is dangerous, Lena finished softly. Yes, and wonderful, and absolutely terrifying. A gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of tropical flowers and the distant sound of Caribbean music from Lena's cottage radio. The night felt magical, suspended between the harsh realities of their situation and the undeniable pull of attraction that had been building since the day they met. In Barbados, Lena said quietly, my grandmother used to say that love comes like the hurricanes. You can see it building on the horizon, but when it finally arrives, all you can do is hold tight and trust that you'll survive the storm. Are we in the path of a hurricane, Lena? She looked at him with eyes that held all the warmth and mystery of the Caribbean nights that had shaped her. I think we've been caught in one since the day I walked into your house. When Ethan reached up to trace the curve of her cheek with his fingertips, Lena's breath caught. When she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting herself feel the warmth of his palm against her skin, the last of his resistance crumbled. This complicates everything, he whispered. I know. It puts your job at risk, threatens Taylor's stability, challenges everything my world believes about appropriate relationships. I know, and I don't care, he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. I don't care about any of it except this moment, this feeling. This woman who's made me remember what it means to be alive. When he kissed her, it was with 3 weeks of suppressed longing, 18 months of grief finally lifting, and the desperate relief of a man who'd thought his heart was broken beyond repair. Lena kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his dark hair as she poured all her own suppressed feelings into the connection between them. They were both breathless when they broke apart, foreheads touching as they tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Ethan, Lena whispered. I know. Everything changes now. From Taylor's bedroom window above them, a small face appeared briefly at the glass, smiling with the satisfaction of a child whose fondest wish was coming true. Then the curtain fell back into place, and Taylor Brooks drifted off to sleep, with dreams of forever families and happy endings. But in the garden below, 2 adults held each other in the moonlight and wondered if love would be enough to survive the storm that was coming. The weekend that followed felt like living in a beautiful dream that could shatter at any moment. Saturday morning found the 3 of them in the mansion's sunlit breakfast room, Taylor chattering happily about plans for the day, while Ethan and Lena exchanged meaningful glances over their coffee cups, the memory of their garden kiss humming between them like a secret melody. Could we go to the park today? Taylor asked, syrup dripping from her fork as she attacked a stack of Lena's Caribbean-spiced pancakes. I want to show Lena the pond where the ducks live. I think that's a wonderful idea, Ethan said, surprising himself. Saturday mornings were usually devoted to business calls and catching up on work, but the thought of spending an entire day with his daughter and the woman who'd transformed their lives felt infinitely more appealing than spreadsheets and quarterly reports. As they prepared for their outing, Ethan found himself watching Lena with new eyes. The way she moved through his house with natural grace, humming Caribbean melodies while she helped Taylor choose an outfit. The way her face lit up when she laughed at something his daughter said. The way her presence seemed to bring warmth and color to spaces that had felt cold and formal for too long. Central Park was busy with weekend families, joggers, and tourists, but Taylor navigated the crowds with confidence, holding both adults' hands as she led them toward her favorite spots. To any observer, they looked like what they were becoming, a family enjoying a perfect Saturday together. But the illusion of normalcy was shattered when Ethan's phone rang with Mark Ellis's distinctive ringtone. I'm sorry, he apologized to Lena, but I need to take this. Business emergency. Mark's voice was tense when Ethan answered. We have a problem. Patricia Worthington called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. She's bringing up concerns about your fitness to lead and suggesting the company needs stable leadership during uncertain times. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Patricia's family controlled significant shares in his company through various charitable foundations and investment trusts. If she convinced the board that his personal life was affecting his judgment, "She can't remove me as chief executive officer," he said, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't entirely certain. "Maybe not directly, but she can make your life hell. And Ethan, there are photographs." "What kind of photographs?" "You and Lena in the garden last night. Someone with a telephoto lens captured some very intimate moments. Patricia's people are shopping them to the society pages as we speak." Ethan glanced over at Taylor and Lena, who were feeding ducks by the pond, completely absorbed in their simple pleasure. His daughter was laughing as the birds crowded around them, and Lena was kneeling beside her, pointing out different species and making up stories about their adventures. It was the most peaceful moment he'd experienced in months, and now it was about to be destroyed by his mother-in-law's vindictive campaign. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad enough. The headlines are already being written. Billionaire's Caribbean romance, and from boardroom to backroom, seem to be the most popular. The racial undertones are unpleasant." Ethan closed his eyes, imagining the humiliation Lena would face when her private life became tabloid entertainment. She'd already endured so much judgment and dismissal in her career. Having their relationship sensationalized and reduced to racist stereotypes would be devastating. "There's more," Mark continued. "Child Services received an anonymous complaint yesterday. They're opening an investigation into Taylor's living situation. Based on what? Inappropriate boundaries between employer and employee. Questions about the stability of the home environment. Concerns about unconventional treatment methods that might constitute neglect." Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Patricia Worthington wasn't just threatening custody anymore. She was systematically attacking every aspect of Ethan's life, using his love for Lena as a weapon against everything he'd built. "Daddy, look." Taylor's voice carried across the park as she ran toward him with a handful of flowers she and Lena had picked. "We made you a bouquet." Ethan forced a smile as he accepted the wildflowers, his heart breaking at his daughter's innocent joy. How could he explain that loving someone who made her happy might cost them everything? "They're beautiful, sweetheart," he said, lifting her into his arms for a hug that felt like it might be one of their last. Lena approached more slowly, her intuitive nature picking up on the tension radiating from his phone call. "Everything all right?" "We need to talk," he said quietly. "But not here." The drive home was subdued, with Taylor dozing in her car seat, while Ethan and Lena maintained careful silence, both sensing that their perfect day was about to be overshadowed by harsh realities. Once Taylor was settled for her afternoon nap, Ethan and Lena retreated to his study, where he closed the door and turned to face the woman who'd become everything to him in just 3 weeks. "Patricia's escalating," he said without preamble. "Board meetings, media campaigns, child services investigations. She's not just threatening custody anymore. She's trying to destroy my entire life." Lena sank into one of the leather chairs, her face pale with understanding. "Because of us. Because of what's happening between us. Because of what happened in the garden last night. Someone photographed us, and the pictures are going public." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Lena had experienced racism and discrimination throughout her career, but having her private life dissected by the media, having their love story twisted into something sordid and sensational, the thought made her feel physically sick. "Maybe," she began hesitantly, "maybe I should leave, temporarily, until the custody situation is resolved." "No." Ethan's response was immediate and fierce. "Running away won't fix this. It'll just convince Patricia that she was right about us being inappropriate." "But if my presence is putting Taylor at risk?" "Your presence is the only thing that's made Taylor feel safe and loved since her mother died. If anyone's putting her at risk, it's the people who can't accept that healing comes in unexpected forms." Lena looked up at him with eyes that held both love and desperation. Then what do we do? How do we protect her without giving up what we found? Before Ethan could answer, a soft knock interrupted them. Taylor appeared in the doorway, her hair mussed from sleep and her face creased with worry. "Are you fighting?" she asked in a small voice. "You look sad like you did before Lena came home." The simple observation cut through their adult complications like a knife. This 6-year-old child, who'd already lost one parent and lived through her father's emotional shutdown, is once again faced with the possibility of losing the security she'd finally found. "Come here, little star," Lena said, opening her arms. Taylor ran to her immediately, climbing into her lap and nestling against her chest with the complete trust of a child who'd found her safe harbor. "We're not fighting," Ethan said, kneeling beside Lena's chair so he could meet his daughter's eyes. "We're just figuring out how to handle some difficult people who don't understand our family." "Grandmother Worthington?" The child's insight was unsettling, but not surprising. Taylor had always been perceptive, and she'd certainly witnessed enough tension between the adults in her life to recognize the source. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandmother Worthington thinks that families should look a certain way, and she doesn't understand that love makes families, not rules." Taylor considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. Mommy used to say that grandmother was scared of things that were different. The casual mention of Rachel made both adults freeze. Taylor rarely spoke about her mother voluntarily, and when she did, it was usually in the context of trauma therapy with Lena. But this observation seemed to come from a place of clarity rather than pain. "What else did Mommy say about being different?" Lena asked gently. "She said that different wasn't bad, just harder sometimes, and that the best families were made of people who chose to love each other, not just people who looked the same." The wisdom of a dead woman, filtered through the memory of a traumatized child, provided the clarity that two adults had been struggling to find. Rachel Brooks, for all her struggles with Ethan's workaholism and her family's expectations, had apparently understood something fundamental about love that her mother had never grasped. "Your mommy was a very smart woman," Lena said softly. "She would have liked you," Taylor said with conviction. "She would have been happy that Daddy smiles again when you're here." The simple statement broke something open in Ethan's chest. He'd spent 18 months carrying guilt about Rachel's death, convinced that moving on meant betraying her memory. But through their daughter's words, he suddenly understood that Rachel would have wanted him to find love again, to give Taylor the stable, happy family she deserved. "Taylor," he said carefully, "if some people try to say that our family isn't right, that Lena shouldn't be here with us, what would you tell them?" Taylor's response was immediate and fierce. "I tell them they're wrong. Lena makes the sad go away. She makes you laugh like you used to before Mommy went to heaven. She makes everything better." That evening, after Taylor had been read 3 extra bedtime stories and tucked in with promises that no one was going anywhere, Ethan and Lena found themselves alone in the garden where everything had changed the night before. The air was warm and fragrant with night-blooming jasmine, and the city lights created a soft glow beyond the mansion's walls. But the romantic atmosphere was overshadowed by the weight of everything they were facing. "The photographs will be everywhere by tomorrow," Lena said quietly. "My face, our private moment, twisted into something ugly for entertainment." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, reaching for her hand. "I'm sorry that loving me is going to cost you so much." "Don't apologize for that," she said firmly. "Don't ever apologize for us. What we have is beautiful and real and worth fighting for. Even if it costs us everything." Lena turned to face him fully, her dark eyes reflecting the garden lights, and something deeper, a strength that had been forged by generations of Caribbean women who'd survived and thrived despite the world's attempts to diminish them. "My grandmother used to tell me that the strongest love always faces the biggest storms. That's how you know it's real, by what you're willing to weather together." "And what are you willing to weather?" "Everything," she said without hesitation. "Media scrutiny, legal battles, social ostracism, all of it. Because what we're building here, this family we're creating with Taylor, is worth more than their approval." The conviction in her voice sparked something fierce and protective in Ethan's chest. This remarkable woman was willing to fight the entire world for their love, for their unconventional family, for the healing they brought to each other's lives. "Lena," he said, her name coming out rough with emotion. "Yes, I love you." The words hung in the night air like a promise, like a declaration of war against everything that threatened them. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word aloud, and the power of it seemed to change the very chemistry of the space between them. "I love you too," she whispered, and when she rose on her toes to kiss him, it felt like sealing a sacred pact. This kiss was different from the night before, deeper, more desperate, charged with the knowledge that their time might be limited. When Ethan's hands tangled in her curls, when Lena pressed closer against him, when their breathing became ragged with wanting, they both knew they were approaching a line that would change everything. "Come with me," Ethan whispered against her lips. Lena pulled back to search his eyes, understanding the invitation and its implications. If they crossed this threshold tonight, if they surrendered to the connection that had been building between them, there would be no pretending their relationship was merely professional. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Hand in hand, they walked through the garden toward Lena's cottage, the small building that had become a sanctuary of warmth and color behind the formal mansion. As Ethan followed her through the front door, he was struck again by how completely she'd transformed the space. Caribbean artwork on the walls, books in multiple languages, the scent of tropical flowers and essential oils creating an atmosphere of healing and home. "This feels like stepping into another world," he said, looking around at the intimate space that was so completely hers. "It is another world," Lena replied, lighting candles that cast dancing shadows across the cottage walls. "A world where love matters more than propriety, where healing happens through ancient wisdom, where families are made by choice rather than convention." The candles created a warm, golden glow that transformed the cottage into something magical. Caribbean music played softly from a small speaker, and the night breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open windows. When Lena turned to face him, her dark skin luminous in the candlelight, her eyes holding all the warmth and mystery of tropical nights, Ethan felt his heart stop. This woman, brilliant, beautiful, brave enough to love him despite the cost, was offering him not just her body, but her heart, her future, her unwavering support in the battles to come. "Are you afraid?" he asked, stepping closer. "Terrified," she admitted, and completely certain that this is right. When they came together this time, it was with the knowledge that they were crossing more than physical boundaries. They were choosing each other over social convention, love over safety, faith over fear. Time seemed suspended as they discovered the language only hearts could speak. Each tender caress wrote poetry on willing skin. In that sacred space filled with candlelight and Caribbean music, all barriers crumbled, leaving only truth and the tender vulnerability of two souls finally finding home. When morning light found them tangled together in Lena's bed, surrounded by the symbols of her heritage and the promise of their future, both knew that whatever storms were coming, they would face them together. But first, they had to survive the headlines that were already hitting newsstands across the city. The custody battle that would determine Taylor's future, and the choice between love and everything else they'd built their lives around. Outside the cottage windows, the first photographers were already positioning themselves for shots of the mansion, and somewhere in her Upper East Side apartment, Patricia Worthington was preparing for war. Sunday morning arrived with the harsh intrusion of reality. Ethan woke in Lena's cottage to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly, with calls from his publicist, his lawyer, and half a dozen board members who'd apparently seen the early edition of the New York Social Register. Lena stirred beside him, her warm brown skin glowing in the morning sunlight that streamed through the cottage windows. For a moment, watching her peaceful face and feeling the rightness of waking up beside her, Ethan allowed himself to forget about the storm that was breaking over their heads. Then his phone rang again, and Mark Ellis's name flashed on the screen. "You need to see this," Mark said, without preamble when Ethan answered. "I'm sending you the links now." Within minutes, Ethan's phone was filled with photographs that made his stomach churn. Someone with a powerful telephoto lens had captured their most private moments, their first kiss in the garden, Tender touches during their park outing, the obvious intimacy in their body language. The headlines were exactly as degrading as Mark had predicted. Billionaire's bedroom boardroom, Brooks CEO's Caribbean conquest, from nanny to mistress, inside the scandalous Brooks household. Trading up, widow finds comfort in exotic help. Each article was more invasive than the last, reducing their love story to racist stereotypes and sexual innuendo. Lena's professional credentials were dismissed or ignored entirely. Her work with Taylor characterized as manipulation, her heritage described in terms that made Ethan's blood boil with rage. "They're painting you as a predator, and me as a victim," Lena said quietly, reading over his shoulder. She'd wrapped herself in a colorful Caribbean sarong, but even the vibrant fabric couldn't hide the pain in her dark eyes. "Or they're painting you as a gold digger and me as an idiot," Ethan replied grimly. "Either way, they're missing the most important part of the story, which is that we're a family who loves each other and we're helping a traumatized child heal." But even as he said the words, Ethan knew that the truth rarely mattered in media frenzies. Public perception would be shaped by these headlines, not by the reality of Taylor's progress or the genuine connection he and Lena had forged. A knock on the cottage door interrupted their crisis management session. Karen Mills stood on the doorstep, her face flushed with embarrassment and her usual composure completely shattered. "Mr. Brooks," she said, not meeting his eyes. "There are reporters at the front gate. They're asking questions about the household arrangements, and Miss Taylor is awake. She's asking why there are cameras outside." The mention of his daughter sent ice through Ethan's veins. Whatever consequences he and Lena faced for their relationship, Taylor couldn't become collateral damage in a media war. "Tell the security team to keep everyone off the property," he instructed. "And tell Taylor that Daddy and Lena are handling some work business. We'll be up to make breakfast in a few minutes." After Karen left, Ethan and Lena dressed quickly, both knowing that their private sanctuary had been permanently invaded. The cottage that had felt like a safe haven just hours earlier now felt exposed and vulnerable. "We need to present a united front," Ethan said as they walked toward the main house. "Whatever they throw at us, we face it together." "Together," Lena agreed, though her voice carried the weight of someone who'd experienced exactly this kind of public humiliation before. The main house felt like a fortress under siege. Security guards posted at every entrance, phones ringing constantly, and the distant sound of camera shutters clicking from beyond the gates. Taylor was in the kitchen with Karen, eating cereal and staring out the window at the commotion with the wide-eyed fascination of a child who didn't yet understand that she was at the center of a scandal. "Daddy," she called when she saw them enter. "There are so many people with cameras outside. Are they here to take pictures of our family?" The innocent question cut straight to the heart of their dilemma. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that society disapproves of the love that's made her happy? How do you protect a child from the ugliness of adult prejudice? "Something like that, sweetheart," Ethan said carefully. "Some people are very interested in our family because Daddy's business is important. But the cameras won't bother us inside our house." "Can they take pictures of Lena?" Taylor asked with sudden concern. "I don't want strangers taking pictures of Lena." The protective instinct in his daughter's voice made Ethan's heart swell with pride, even as it broke his heart that she needed to worry about such things. "No one can take pictures of anyone without permission," Lena said gently, though they all knew that wasn't entirely true. "And if they try, we'll tell them that our family has the right to privacy." The morning passed in a blur of crisis management. Ethan's lawyer arrived to discuss legal strategies for protecting Taylor from media exposure. His publicist crafted carefully worded statements about private family matters and respecting a child's well-being. Mark Ellis coordinated with the company's board to minimize business disruption. But through it all, the most damaging development was yet to come. At noon, Patricia Worthington's limousine pulled up to the mansion's front gate, followed closely by a black sedan carrying what appeared to be child services officials. The photographers went wild, sensing that the real story was about to unfold. "She's not wasting any time," Mark observed grimly from Ethan's study window. "Emergency custody filing, media circus, official investigation. It's a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm your defenses. Ethan watched his mother-in-law emerge from her car with the bearing of a general leading troops into battle. She was perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, and completely prepared to destroy his life in service of her vision of propriety. "She's using Taylor as a weapon," he said quietly, "using our love against us to justify taking away my daughter." "The question is," Mark replied, "are you prepared to fight back just as hard?" Before Ethan could answer, the doorbell rang with the formal authority of official business. Karen's voice echoed through the mansion as she announced the arrival of officials from Child Services, who needed to speak with Mr. Brooks immediately. Lena appeared at the study door, her face pale but determined. "They're here for me, aren't they? To question my methods, my qualifications, my relationship with Taylor? They're here because Patricia thinks she can use official channels to accomplish what custody threats couldn't," Ethan replied. "But she's underestimated something crucial." "What's that?" "She's underestimated Taylor, and she's underestimated us." The Child Services interview took place in the mansion's formal dining room, with Taylor playing quietly nearby, while officials questioned both Ethan and Lena about the household arrangements, therapeutic methods, and the nature of their personal relationship. Patricia Worthington sat at the far end of the polished table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Her lawyer had clearly coached her on which phrases would sound most damaging. Inappropriate boundaries, unprofessional conduct, environmental instability, cultural confusion. "Mr. Brooks," the lead investigator said, consulting her notes, "can you explain the living arrangements between yourself, your daughter, and Miss Davis?" "Miss Davis resides in the guest cottage and provides professional therapy services for my daughter, under the supervision of Dr. Laura Bennett from Mount Sinai Hospital," Ethan replied formally. "She's a licensed child psychologist with a master's degree from Columbia University." "And the nature of your personal relationship with Miss Davis?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Answer too professionally, and he'd be lying under oath. Answer too honestly, and he'd be providing ammunition for Patricia's custody case. "Miss Davis and I have developed feelings for each other," he said carefully. "But those feelings have never interfered with her professional care of my daughter. In fact, Taylor's progress has been remarkable since Miss Davis joined our household. Progress that includes sleeping in the same bed during storms, shared meals, and what some might characterize as premature attachment to a non-family member." Lena spoke up before Ethan could respond. "Taylor suffered severe trauma when her mother died in a car accident. Traditional therapy failed to help her process that trauma or regain her ability to communicate effectively. The methods I've used, including music therapy, storytelling, and creating secure attachment relationships, are all evidence-based approaches for treating childhood trauma. Methods that include what you call Caribbean healing traditions?" The way the investigator said Caribbean healing traditions made it sound like something dangerous and foreign, and Lena felt the familiar sting of having her cultural background dismissed as primitive or unscientific. Traditional healing methods that had been used successfully for generations to help children process trauma and build resilience, she replied with dignity. "Combined with my graduate training in child psychology to create an integrated therapeutic approach." Patricia Worthington leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering the killing blow. "An approach that apparently includes developing romantic relationships with the parents of your patients. Surely you can see how that compromises professional boundaries." The relationship between Mr. Brooks and myself developed naturally over time as we worked together to help Taylor heal, Lena said firmly. "It didn't affect my professional judgment. It enhanced my investment in this family's well-being." "Family?" The investigator seized on the word. "You consider yourself part of this family?" Before Lena could answer, Taylor's clear voice cut through the adult conversation like a bell. "She is part of our family," the child said, looking up from her coloring book with the serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. "Lena makes Daddy smile like he used to before Mommy went to heaven. She helps me not be scared anymore. She taught me that broken things can be fixed if you have enough love." The room fell silent as everyone processed the wisdom of a 6-year-old's perspective. Here was the central figure in the custody dispute, speaking clearly and confidently, for the first time in 18 months, defending the woman who'd helped her find her voice again. "Taylor," the investigator said gently, "can you tell us how Miss Davis helps you when you're scared? She sings the special songs that make the bad dreams go away. She tells stories about brave children who lose their mommies but find new families that love them. She makes tea that tastes like sunshine and teaches me about flowers that help hurt feelings get better. And how do you feel about your daddy and Miss Davis being friends?" Taylor considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. "I feel happy. Daddy was very sad after Mommy died, and he forgot how to laugh. But Lena helps him remember that it's okay to be happy again. Mommy would want us to be happy." The simple truth of a child's observation cut through all the adult complications and legal maneuvering. Patricia Worthington's face had gone rigid with fury, clearly not expecting her granddaughter to so eloquently defend the relationship she was trying to destroy. "Taylor, darling," Patricia said with forced sweetness, "wouldn't you like to come live with grandmother and grandfather? We have a beautiful house with gardens and your own pony." "No, thank you," Taylor replied politely but firmly. "I want to stay with Daddy and Lena. This is my home and they're my family." The investigator made careful notes while Patricia's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. It was clear that the case they'd thought would be straightforward, demonstrating an unstable household environment, was becoming complicated by the testimony of a well-spoken, clearly loved child who was thriving in the very situation they claimed was harmful. After the officials left, promising to complete their investigation within 48 hours, the mansion felt like a battlefield where the first skirmish had been fought to a draw. Taylor had been extraordinary in defending their family, but the ultimate decision would rest with bureaucrats who might prioritize conventional appearances over a child's emotional well-being. The stakes couldn't be higher. True love versus everything Ethan has built. Have you ever faced an impossible choice between your heart and your security? Tell me in the comments what you think Ethan should do. And don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's continuation of this heart-wrenching story. That evening, as photographers maintained their vigil outside the gates and the media frenzy continued to build, Ethan stood in his study, staring at the family photo on his desk. Himself, Rachel, and baby Taylor in happier times. The guilt he'd carried since Rachel's death felt different now. Not because it had disappeared, but because he'd finally understood something crucial. Rachel would have wanted him to be happy. She would have wanted Taylor to heal and thrive. And she would have recognized that love, real transformative love, was worth fighting for, regardless of its packaging. "Daddy?" Taylor appeared in the doorway, already in her pajamas and ready for bedtime stories. "Are you sad about the camera people?" "A little," he admitted. "Sometimes adults make things more complicated than they need to be. Lena says that's because they forget that love is simple. It just means taking care of each other and making each other happy." "Lena's right. Are you going to marry her?" The question came with such casual confidence that Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you ask that?" "Because that's what people do when they love each other, the way you love Lena. And because I want her to be my mommy for real. Not just in my heart." The simple honesty of his daughter's words crystallized something that had been building in Ethan's mind since their first kiss in the garden. This wasn't just about defending their relationship or fighting Patricia's custody threats. This was about claiming the family they'd become and making it official in the eyes of the world. "Would you like that?" he asked. "If Lena became your stepmother officially?" "More than anything," Taylor said with the fervent conviction of childhood wishes. "But first you have to ask her properly. With a ring and everything. That's how it works in all the princess stories." Later that night, after Taylor had been tucked in with extra stories and promises that their family would weather any storm, Ethan found Lena in the cottage, packing her belongings once again. "What are you doing?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Being realistic, she replied without looking up from her suitcase. "The investigation, the media attention, the custody threats. It's all because of me. If I remove myself from the situation, Taylor will be devastated. I'll be devastated. And Patricia will win. Maybe Patricia should win, Lena said quietly. Maybe a little girl deserves a stable, conventional family instead of being caught in the middle of a scandal. Ethan crossed the cottage in 3 strides, catching Lena's hands and forcing her to meet his eyes. Look at me. Really look at me. Do you see a man who's been damaged by loving you? Or do you see a man who's been saved by it? Tears streamed down Lena's face as she studied his features, the warmth that had returned to his steel blue eyes, the ease in his shoulders that spoke of a man no longer carrying the weight of the world alone, the genuine smile that had become as natural as breathing since she'd entered his life. I see a man who's learned to live again, she whispered. And what do you see when you look at Taylor? A little girl who's found her voice, her courage, her ability to trust and love again. Then how can you even consider walking away from that? How can you let other people's prejudices convince you that what we've built here isn't worth fighting for? Lena collapsed against his chest, her resolve finally crumbling under the weight of her own love for this impossible family. I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of losing everything, but I'm more scared of destroying the happiness you and Taylor have found. The only thing that could destroy our happiness is giving up on each other, he said fiercely. Whatever comes tomorrow, custody hearings, media scrutiny, social ostracism, we face it together, as a family. Promise me, she whispered against his chest. I promise. And Lena? Yes. There's something else we need to discuss. Something about making our family official in every way that matters. When she pulled back to search his eyes, she saw something there that made her heart stop. Determination, love, and the unmistakable look of a man who'd made a life-changing decision. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow, when the world tries to tear us apart, I want them to understand that they're not just fighting a relationship, they're fighting a marriage. They're fighting a legal family that no court can dissolve, and no amount of social pressure can destroy. The proposal hung between them like a bridge to their future, and as Lena stared at this remarkable man who was willing to risk everything for their love, she knew that whatever storms were coming, they would weather them together. But first, they had to survive the custody hearing that would determine whether their family had a future at all. Monday morning arrived with the weight of destiny. The Manhattan family court building rose before them like a fortress of justice, its limestone facade imposing against the gray October sky. News vans lined the street, reporters pressed against police barricades, and photographers with telephoto lenses captured every step as Ethan Brooks walked toward his family's future. He wore his most expensive suit like armor, his steel blue eyes focused straight ahead as he navigated the media gauntlet. Beside him, Lena moved with quiet dignity, her natural grace undiminished by the chaos surrounding them. She'd chosen a simple yellow dress that spoke of professionalism and respect for the court, her hair pulled back in an elegant style that emphasized the intelligence in her dark eyes. Mark Ellis flanked them like a bodyguard, while their lawyer carried briefcases full of evidence documenting Taylor's remarkable progress. But the most important witness to their family's truth was the 6-year-old girl who walked between them, holding both their hands with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Patricia Worthington commanded the front row like a general reviewing troops, surrounded by her legal team and character witnesses from New York's social elite. Behind them sat reporters, curious socialites, and members of the Caribbean community who'd come to support Lena. The division was stark: old money versus new love, tradition versus transformation, fear versus hope. Judge Margaret Harrison entered with the bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating family crises. Her silver hair and intelligent eyes suggested wisdom earned through countless custody battles, and her expression remained carefully neutral as she surveyed the packed courtroom. "This is an emergency custody hearing for Taylor Rachel Brooks," Judge Harrison announced. "I want to make something clear from the outset. This court's only concern is the best interests of the child. Personal prejudices, social conventions, and media attention have no place in these proceedings." Patricia Worthington's lawyer rose first, a silver-haired man whose patrician bearing suggested he was more comfortable with estate planning than custody battles. "Your Honor," The Worthington family seeks emergency custody based on documented evidence of an unstable home environment. Mr. Brooks has developed an inappropriate relationship with domestic staff, blurring professional boundaries in ways that compromise his daughter's well-being. The lawyer presented his case with clinical precision. Photographs of Ethan and Lena's intimate moments, testimony about shared bedrooms during storms, character witnesses questioning the appropriateness of Caribbean healing methods. Each piece of evidence was designed to paint a picture of a household where proper boundaries had dissolved into chaos. The child has become inappropriately attached to someone who is fundamentally an employee, the lawyer continued. This attachment prevents her from forming proper relationships with appropriate authority figures and exposes her to cultural influences that may confuse her sense of identity. The racist undertones were subtle but unmistakable, and Lena felt the familiar sting of having her heritage characterized as something dangerous or foreign. But she forced herself to remain composed, knowing that Taylor was watching and learning how to face prejudice with dignity. When Ethan's lawyers stood to present their defense, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Dr. Laura Bennett took the stand first, her medical credentials and professional experience lending weight to her testimony. Taylor Brooks suffered severe trauma following her mother's death in a car accident. Dr. Bennett explained. For 18 months, traditional therapy methods failed to help her process this trauma or regain her ability to communicate effectively. Miss Davis's integrated approach, combining evidence-based psychology with cultural healing traditions, has produced remarkable results. She presented charts documenting Taylor's progress, audio recordings of the child's growing vocabulary, and video evidence of her increasing confidence and emotional stability. The transformation was undeniable, even to Patricia's legal team. In my professional opinion, Dr. Bennett concluded, separating Taylor from Miss Davis at this point would constitute therapeutic abandonment and could trigger a severe regression in her healing process. Mark Ellis testified about Ethan's business acumen and stability, painting a picture of a man whose professional success had never been questioned until he dared to love someone outside his social circle. Character witnesses spoke of Ethan's devotion as a father and his commitment to Taylor's well-being. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. "I'd like to call Dr. Nina Davis to the stand," Ethan's lawyer announced. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom as a dignified woman in her late 60s rose from the gallery. Nina Davis had flown in from Barbados that morning, her presence a complete surprise to everyone except Ethan and Lena. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent a lifetime healing broken families, her silver hair crowned in traditional braids and her dark eyes holding the wisdom of generations. "Dr. Davis," the lawyer began, "can you explain your relationship to this case?" "I am Lena's grandmother and her teacher in traditional healing methods," Nina replied, her Caribbean accent adding musical cadence to her words. "I hold a doctorate in cultural anthropology from the University of the West Indies and have spent 40 years documenting the therapeutic value of traditional healing practices." Patricia Worthington's face went rigid with shock. The primitive island superstitions she dismissed so casually were being presented by a woman with impeccable academic credentials. "Can you explain how traditional Caribbean healing methods apply to childhood trauma therapy?" Traditional healing recognizes that trauma lives in the body and the spirit, not just the mind, Nina explained. Through music, storytelling, herbal remedies, and community support, we help children reconnect with their inherent resilience. These methods have helped Caribbean families survive centuries of trauma: slavery, colonization, natural disasters, family separation. She spoke with such eloquence and authority that even Patricia's lawyer seemed reluctant to cross-examine her. Here was a woman who embodied everything their case had tried to dismiss: cultural wisdom presented with academic rigor, traditional methods validated by scholarly research, foreign practices revealed as sophisticated therapeutic approaches. "My granddaughter learned these methods from me, then enhanced them with modern psychological training," Nina continued. "What she's done with little Taylor is exactly what traditional healers have always done: Help children find their voices again after trauma tries to steal them. The courtroom was completely silent as Nina stepped down, her testimony having demolished the foundation of Patricia's case. But the real drama was yet to come. "Your Honor," Ethan's lawyer said, "I'd like to call Taylor Brooks to testify on her own behalf." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Child testimony in custody cases was rare and always emotionally charged. Judge Harrison studied the 6-year-old who sat between her father and Lena, noting the child's calm demeanor and clear eyes. "Taylor," the judge said gently, "do you understand that you can talk to me about your family and what makes you happy?" "Yes, Your Honor," Taylor replied clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. The judge had special accommodations brought in, a lower chair, a microphone adjusted to child height, and comfort items including one of Lena's colorful scarves. As Taylor settled at the witness stand, she looked small but unafraid, her steel blue eyes reflecting the same determination that had built her father's empire. "Taylor," Ethan's lawyer began gently, "can you tell us about your family?" "I have the best family," Taylor said with conviction. "Daddy loves me more than anything, and Lena helps us both remember how to be happy again after Mommy went to heaven." "How does Lena help you?" "She teaches me that it's okay to miss Mommy, but I don't have to be scared forever. She shows me how to make the bad dreams go away with special songs, and how to grow flowers that help hurt feelings get better. She helps Daddy smile like he used to before he got so sad." The simple honesty of childhood cut through all the legal maneuvering and social prejudice. Here was the central figure in the custody dispute, speaking clearly about healing and love and family bonds that transcended conventional definitions. "Taylor," Patricia's lawyer said when his turn came to question her, "wouldn't you like to live in a big house with ponies and gardens and everything a little princess could want?" Taylor considered this seriously, then shook her head. "I already have everything I want. I have Daddy and Lena in our house where we're all together. Grandmother Worthington's house doesn't have Lena, so it wouldn't be my family anymore." "But sweetheart, Lena is just someone who works for your daddy. Wouldn't you rather have a real family?" The question was clearly designed to confuse and manipulate a child. But Taylor's response showed wisdom beyond her years. "Lena is my real family," she said firmly. "She takes care of me when I'm scared, helps me with my homework, sings me to sleep when I have bad dreams. She loves me like a mommy, and I love her like a daughter. That's what makes families real, loving each other and taking care of each other." Patricia Worthington watched her carefully constructed case crumble before her eyes. Her own granddaughter was eloquently defending the very relationship Patricia had tried to destroy, speaking about love and healing in ways that made the court's decision inevitable. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. "Your Honor," Ethan said, rising from his seat, "I have something to add to my testimony." Judge Harrison nodded for him to approach the witness stand again. As Ethan walked across the courtroom, he could feel the weight of every eye upon him, the media, his peers, Patricia's furious glare, and most importantly, Lena's hopeful gaze. "Mr. Brooks," his lawyer prompted, "is there additional information the court should consider?" Ethan turned to face the packed courtroom, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire and the vulnerability of a man fighting for his family's future. "Your Honor, I want this court to understand that we're not just defending a relationship or a custody arrangement. We're defending a family that's been forged through love, tested by crisis, and proven by its commitment to healing." He paused, his eyes finding Lena's across the courtroom. "Last night, I asked Lena Davis to marry me. She said yes." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Patricia Worthington's face went white with rage, and camera flashes blazed as everyone tried to capture the moment when a custody battle became a love story. Judge Harrison banged her gavel for order, but Ethan wasn't finished. "I'm not asking this court to approve of my choice," he continued when the chaos subsided. "I'm asking this court to recognize that a family built on love, commitment, and shared dedication to a child's well-being deserves protection under the law. Lena Davis isn't just Taylor's therapist or my employee. She's going to be my wife and Taylor's stepmother. She's the woman who saved us both." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before every social convention, and family prejudice that had brought them to this moment. Patricia Worthington looked like she was about to faint, while Taylor clapped her hands with delight from the witness stand. Furthermore, Ethan said, his voice growing stronger, I have evidence that this court needs to see. He nodded to Mark Ellis, who rose and approached the judge's bench with a folder of documents. Your Honor, our investigation has uncovered information about the car accident that killed my wife Rachel Brooks 18 months ago. A hush fell over the courtroom as everyone sensed that the case was about to take an unexpected turn. The emergency response to my wife's accident was delayed by 20 minutes due to interference from someone who wanted to pressure her into leaving our marriage. Ethan continued, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Someone who thought they could arrange a more suitable husband for her from their social circle. Patricia Worthington's face had gone from white to gray, and her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear. But Ethan wasn't finished. Rachel's final voice message, which we've only recently recovered, makes it clear that she was being forced to choose between her family and her mother's approval. The stress of that choice contributed to the accident that took her life. The implications of his words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. The woman who'd been arguing for proper family values had potentially contributed to the death of her own daughter through manipulation and control. I won't let Patricia Worthington destroy another family the way she destroyed mine, Ethan said firmly. I won't let her use guilt and social pressure to separate me from the woman I love or to traumatize my daughter further. Judge Harrison studied the evidence Mark had presented, her expression growing graver with each page. When she finally looked up, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony heard today, this court finds that Taylor Brooks is thriving in her current environment. The relationship between Mr. Brooks and Miss Davis, far from being detrimental to the child's well-being, appears to have been instrumental in her emotional recovery. Patricia Worthington made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, surely the court can see that this is highly irregular. What's irregular, Judge Harrison cut her off sharply, is a family member attempting to manipulate custody proceedings based on personal prejudices rather than a child's best interests. The emergency custody petition is denied. The courtroom exploded in cheers from Lena's supporters, while Patricia's legal team scrambled to process their devastating defeat. Through it all, Taylor sat in the witness chair with a huge smile, having just watched her father fight for their family in the most public way possible. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, given the evidence of interference in family relationships and the potential connection to the tragic death of Rachel Brooks, this court is recommending that the district attorney's office review whether criminal charges are warranted. Patricia Worthington's face crumpled as she realized that her campaign to destroy Ethan's family had instead exposed her own culpability in her daughter's death. Her lawyer was already moving toward the exit, abandoning a client whose case had become indefensible. As the courtroom began to clear, Ethan swept Taylor into his arms while Lena rushed to join them. The three of them stood together in the center of the courtroom, no longer hiding their love or their commitment to each other. We did it, Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. We're really a family. We were always a family, Ethan replied, gathering both his girls into his embrace. Now the whole world knows it. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but Ethan had only one thing to say. My daughter, my fiancé, and I are going home to plan a wedding. That's all the statement you need. As their car pulled away from the courthouse, Taylor sitting between her father and soon-to-be stepmother, the little girl who'd been silent for 18 months, had the last word. I told you families stick together. Even when people try to break them apart, love always wins. In the distance, Patricia Worthington stood alone on the courthouse steps, abandoned by her lawyers and her certainties. Finally understanding that the family she'd tried to destroy had been stronger than all her prejudices combined. Justice, it seemed, really did have a sense of poetry. 6 months later, the Brooks mansion had been transformed into something that reflected the family it housed, still elegant and refined, but now filled with warmth, laughter, and the vibrant colors of Caribbean culture that Lena had brought into their lives. The formal living rooms displayed Taylor's artwork alongside priceless paintings, while the sound of Caribbean music and children's laughter echoed through halls that had once felt like a mausoleum. The wedding preparations had been a study in blending traditions. Lena's grandmother, Nina, had flown in from Barbados with a suitcase full of traditional fabrics and family recipes, while Ethan's friends and business associates had slowly come to accept and then embrace the remarkable woman who'd transformed their friend from a grief-stricken workaholic into a man who radiated contentment. The ceremony itself took place in the mansion's gardens, where Caribbean steel drums mixed with classical strings, where traditional American wedding vows were followed by Barbadian blessing songs, and where Taylor served as flower girl in a dress that perfectly matched Lena's gown, both created from fabric that Nina had woven with her own hands. Dr. Laura Bennett officiated, having become not just Taylor's therapist, but a close family friend who understood the significance of what they were celebrating. As she pronounced Ethan and Lena husband and wife, Taylor cheered from the front row with the enthusiasm of a child whose deepest wish had finally come true. "You may kiss your bride," Dr. Bennett announced with a smile, "and your new daughter may kiss her new mother." The kiss between Ethan and Lena was tender but passionate, witnessed by a crowd that had learned to celebrate love in all its beautiful forms. But the moment that brought tears to every eye was when Taylor launched herself into Lena's arms, whispering "Mommy" for the first time since Rachel's death. The reception was a perfect fusion of cultures: traditional American wedding cake alongside Barbadian rum cake, ballroom dancing mixed with Caribbean rhythms, and toasts given in both English and patois. Mark Ellis, as best man, raised his glass to "the man who taught us all that the best families are built on love, not convention," while Nina Davis blessed the union with ancient words about strength through storms and joy through seasons of change. But the most moving moment came when an unexpected guest arrived during the reception. Patricia Worthington appeared at the garden gate like a ghost from their past, her usual imperious bearing replaced by something that looked almost like humility. The woman who had once threatened to destroy their family now stood alone, her silver hair perfectly styled, but her blue eyes holding the weight of devastating loss. The music stopped as everyone noticed her arrival, and Taylor instinctively moved closer to Lena, still wary of the grandmother who had tried to take her away from her chosen family. "Patricia," Ethan said carefully, moving to greet his former mother-in-law with Lena beside him in a show of united strength. "I came to wait," Patricia began, then stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily to someone accustomed to issuing commands rather than making apologies. "I came to ask your forgiveness, and to tell you that Rachel would have loved her." She nodded toward Lena, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no hostility or condescension in her expression. Only the grief of a woman who'd finally understood that her prejudices had cost her everything. "The investigation into Rachel's accident," Patricia continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "it revealed things about my own role that I can never undo. My interference, my pressure, my inability to accept that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. I contributed to my daughter's death, and then I tried to do the same thing to yours." Lena stepped forward, her natural compassion overcoming years of hurt and rejection. "Mrs. Worthington, we all make mistakes when we're afraid of losing the people we love." "You're more generous than I deserve," Patricia replied, tears streaming down her perfectly composed face. "But I want you to know that watching you with Taylor, seeing how you've helped her heal and grow, I finally understand what Rachel was trying to tell me before she died." "What was that?" Ethan asked quietly. "That families aren't made by blood or social position or shared histories. They're made by people who choose to love each other through everything: fear, loss, prejudice, and all the obstacles the world puts in their way." Patricia turned to Taylor, who was watching the adult conversation with the wise eyes of a child who'd learned early that grown-ups sometimes needed forgiveness too. "Taylor, sweetheart," Patricia said, kneeling to meet her granddaughter's eyes, "can you forgive an old woman who was so scared of change that she almost destroyed the best thing that ever happened to your family?" Taylor studied her grandmother's face for a long moment, then looked up at Lena and Ethan before making her decision. Families forgive each other, she said simply. That's what Lena taught me. If you promise not to try to take us apart anymore, you can stay for cake. The offer of cake, delivered with the serious diplomacy of a 6-year-old, broke the tension and brought laughter to a moment that could have been awkward. Patricia's tears flowed freely as she embraced her granddaughter for the first time in months. I promise, she whispered. I promise to do better. As the reception continued into the evening, something beautiful emerged from what could have been a confrontation. Patricia found herself in conversation with Nina Davis, two grandmothers from different worlds, discovering that their love for the same child could bridge any cultural divide. Mark Ellis introduced her to other guests as family, and slowly, Patricia began to understand that belonging didn't require conformity, it only required love. The evening ended, with Taylor fast asleep in her new mother's arms, while Ethan and Lena swayed to the last dance of their wedding day. Around them, the garden glowed with fairy lights and the warm laughter of friends who'd learned to celebrate love in all its forms. No regrets? Ethan whispered against Lena's ear as they danced. Only that it took us so long to get here, she replied, looking down at Taylor's peaceful face and then up at the man who'd fought the world to claim their family. We got here exactly when we were supposed to, he said, when we were both ready to choose love over fear. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. The Brooks family had become a symbol of hope for unconventional families everywhere, their story having inspired countless others to fight for love that transcended social boundaries. Ethan's business had thrived under his new approach to leadership, one that valued authenticity over conformity, compassion over competition. The charitable foundation he'd established in Rachel's memory focused on supporting innovative therapy programs for traumatized children, with Lena serving as the program director. Lena's integrated healing methods had gained national recognition, with medical schools incorporating her techniques into their pediatric psychology programs. She split her time between treating patients and training other therapists, but her favorite role remained the simplest one: mother to a remarkable little girl who taught them all about resilience. Taylor, now 7 and thriving in 2nd grade, had become bilingual in English and patois, could identify dozens of healing herbs by sight, and had recently informed her parents that she intended to become either a doctor like Lena or a business person like Daddy, or maybe both, because families help each other do everything. The child who'd been silent for 18 months now spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted she was loved. Her trauma had become part of her strength, her healing journey a testament to the power of combining traditional wisdom with modern love. On a warm spring evening, as the family sat in their garden sharing dinner and stories of their day, Taylor made an announcement that surprised no one but filled them all with joy. I'm going to have a little sister, she declared matter-of-factly, causing Ethan to choke on his wine and Lena to laugh with pure delight. How do you know that, little star? Lena asked, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat belly, where new life was indeed beginning to grow. Because I asked the baby to be a sister when I was talking to the flowers today. And Grandmama Nina taught me that babies always listen to big sister's wishes. Ethan looked at his wife with wonder and joy that never seemed to fade, no matter how many miracles their love continued to produce. Is it true? 3 weeks along, Lena confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. This is the right moment, Ethan said, gathering both his girls into his arms. Every moment with you is the right moment. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light across the garden where their love story had truly begun, the Brooks family held each other close and marveled at the beautiful life they'd built together. Taylor had been right from the very beginning. Families stick together. Love always wins. And sometimes the most broken people create the most beautiful wholeness when they dare to heal together. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, and Caribbean music drifted from the cottage where it all began, carrying on the evening breeze like a blessing over a family that had learned to bloom exactly where love had planted them. The little girl who wouldn't speak had found her voice. The man who'd forgotten how to love had remembered how to live. And the woman who'd been dismissed as just the help had become the heart of a family that would love each other through every storm and celebrate each other through every season of joy. This story proves that fighting for love, even when the world says it's wrong, creates the most beautiful families. When we choose authenticity over acceptance, when we value healing over hiding, when we dare to love beyond the boundaries others set for us, that's when we discover that the most precious treasures often come disguised as impossibilities. What unconventional relationship in your life taught you the most about the transformative power of love? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and am constantly amazed by the courage and creativity love inspires in all of us. If this story touched your heart, reminded you that love really can conquer all, or gave you hope for your own seemingly impossible dreams, hit that like button and subscribe for tomorrow's new tale. Because love stories like this remind us that the best families aren't born, they're chosen, fought for, and built one brave choice at a time. Tomorrow, we'll discover what happens when a brilliant surgeon meets the mysterious woman who holds both the key to saving his career and healing his guarded heart. Don't miss it. Your heart will thank you for the journey. Ring that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in the power of unconventional love. And remember, in a world that often values conformity over connection, choosing love is always the most revolutionary act of all. Until tomorrow, keep believing in love that breaks all the rules and creates all the magic.